Hi, this is Greg Kesich at the Portland Press Herald, and I'm here with Bill Nemitz for our regular weekly podcast, and our guest today is Scott Thistle, who is our State House reporter. Thanks for coming in, Scott.
Yeah, thanks for having me, guys.
So, how long have you been doing this?
I've been covering politics in Maine for the last 10 years now, going on 11 years, I guess. Yeah. Prior to that, I was a reporter in Maine and in Minnesota. I covered the legislature there for 4 years, so I've got a little bit of experience.
He's got the legislative bug.
Right, and he's got the...
Got to cover Jesse Ventura.
It's the right 10 years to have been covering Maine politics, for sure. You have a story today about a new candidate who's announced in the 2nd District race. You want to tell us about that?
Lucas Sinclair, who was a big advocate for the Katahdin Woods and Water National Monument up in northern Maine near Baxter State Park, and is also the son of the philanthropist Roxanne Quimby, who we know made millions with the Burt's Bees Company, and she actually donated that land and a big endowment to keep the monument going. He has announced that he's going to make a bid for the 2nd Congressional District against Poliquin. He becomes the 6th Democratic candidate now in this race, so we almost have as many in this race as the governor's race.
6.
Can you name them?
No. Well, Jared Golden's the only one who comes to mind, and there's a few others, but as there always are in these races.
Yeah.
But up until now, it has seemed that most eyes were on Golden as the leading candidate on the Democratic side. This probably changes that a little bit.
Yeah, Golden got into the race in August, and he is notably an Iraq and Afghanistan war veteran, combat veteran, and he's the assistant majority leader in the House of Representatives. So, and he's a Lewiston 2nd District heart of this, I guess, but Bangor and Lewiston would like to duke it out to see who really owns the 2nd District, but...
And what 2nd District town does Lucas Sinclair come from?
He is moving, we are told. He has purchased a home in Hamden, but he currently, which his Republican opponents were quick to point out today, is a registered voter in the city of Portland. So,
it was interesting. On the one hand, that's going to be an issue. On the other hand, he sure got their attention.
Right.
Quickly.
Right.
I mean, his video, I don't know what time he posted that video this morning on Facebook, but within certainly a few hours, if not less, the Maine Republican Party was out hammering away at the residency issue, which is interesting.
Yeah.
Because wasn't that an issue with their guy?
I don't remember everything, but I do remember that Bruce Poliquin was also not a long-term resident of the 2nd District, and actually both Sinclair and Poliquin grew up there, right? I mean, isn't that
Yeah, Bruce Poliquin grew up in Waterville area, and his family lived in Oakland. They had a home there. I just actually looked back at this, and Representative Poliquin was taking flack from his Republican challenger in the primary in 2014, who was, as you know, Kevin Ray. And
who could not be more 2nd District if you tried.
Right. Kevin Ray is from the town of Perry, Maine, and so there was a kind of a dust up there, and Bruce announced his candidacy in August, but he did not register to vote in the town of Oakland until October. So that's 3 months, right? 3 months afterwards.
Which isn't against the law.
Right.
I mean, nothing illegal. Nothing illegal.
I mean, everybody. It's perfectly legal to represent a congressional district and not reside in that district.
Right.
So.
Yeah, and actually this year we had a story from our sister paper in the Kennebec Journal or the Waterville Sentinel. It was one of those two. They had a report that Poliquin had put his Oakland home up for sale because he was downsizing. There wasn't an indication of whether he was going to buy another home in that area or not, but he does have a property that he is known to, stay at down in Georgetown on the coast.
So if everybody stays in this primary race, this will be the biggest congressional primary we've seen since 2008, right? I would think so. Anyway, that was the five-way Pingree, Strimling, Brennan. Anyway, it's a big field for a Democratic primary.
Yeah, in 2016, the Democrats kind of just rolled over and let Emily Kane do it again, which wasn't really a successful formula.
Right. Maybe it'll be different this time. That was the attitude, right?
Right.
Yeah. But so what do you make of this field? Obviously, Lucas Sinclair is not going to have any trouble raising money.
I think that's why you saw the Republicans were out there quickly reacting, is that they know that he's going to be able to reach into the 1st District, where we know a lot of the money, what money there is in Maine, likely resides in the 1st District. I mean, there's certainly some wealthy donors in the 2nd District that get involved in these races at times, but the ones that come to mind are typically wealthy Republican donors, like Bob Baer or some of those folks up in Oxford County that might have some money.
Do we, when we look at the 1st and 2nd districts in the general election, we think of the 2nd District as more conservative, more rural, and I'm wondering, is that also true in the primaries on the Democratic side, anyway?
I think Democrats in the 2nd District are a little bit more, if we look at the past and we look at how, Mike Michaud positioned himself, he was an old school blue dog Democrat. He was a pro-life, pro-gun Democrat, and I think that's going to factor. I think we can see from this last 2016 race, the 2nd District voted for Donald Trump. So there's some of that, but the Maine GOP will tell you that the 2nd District is now red. Mm-hmm. I'm not convinced, I think, fully of that.
You also wonder how much, certainly if St. Clair were to get the nomination, how much this will turn into a race of personalities versus politics. I mean, Bruce has attracted a lot of attention by avoiding attention over the past couple of years. There's a lot of, I'm sure that's going to be an issue, but just the sheer size of the persona here, and Lucas St. Clair has really come to symbolize everything around Katahdin Woods and Waters. That's certainly been, the primary issue up there for a long time. And so, I wonder how much of it will just come down to, who's likable, who isn't, who's considered the insider when it comes to the 1st District, or who isn't. I think there's a lot at play here in terms of just the size of the personalities. The 2nd District too, I think, though, you could get this perception of, quote unquote, the carpetbagger, well-heeled, lots of money, lots of, trustafarian kind of trust fund guy, and then you look at who else is in that race. You got Jared Golden, who also, has lived in the 2nd District all his life. From Lewiston.
Yeah. He lives in Lewiston now. He grew up outside of Lewiston, just on the fringe there. I think there's Litchfield. His family owns a little golf course there. He's got a story too. I think people don't want to forget about.
I just think of the what was it, a 2014 primary between Troy Jackson and Emily Kane. And a lot of what I thought about the 2nd District didn't translate into the primary, because the kind of voters that were turning out were more interested in environmental issues than might be true in November. And I wonder if that kind of thing would play out, because you remember there was a lot of money spent on by a national environmental group on behalf of Emily attacking Troy Jackson.
Yeah, and I think did Democrats, I will ask the question, did Democrats learn their lesson from that? Is that the way to win the 2nd District back, is to have a lot of money flowing in from outside and what appears to be maybe a kind of small special interest? Or is it really, do you really want to be is it money, or is it who the person is and what the story is?
And which of the rich guys can look less like a rich guy?
Right.
Because they're both in their fabulously wealthy candidates.
You're talking about if in
the general.
Sinclair, yeah.
And just the fact that we're dealing with the part of the state that is certainly the most economically challenged. So it's going to be interesting to see how, if it is those two, how they would pivot away from their money.
Yeah. And Poliquin will have the strength of the incumbency.
It's so powerful.
It's hard to, in that 2nd District, it's hard to get rid of an incumbent that has a good name recognition. I will say they both have Franco-American sounding names, so that might be an advantage to them in certain quarters, not Not saying that's always the case, but I think we'd be silly to think that there's not some of that kind of association that happens at times. If you go in the voting booth and you don't know anything else about somebody.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I wonder if St. Clair's sort of money and prestige and name recognition is the kind of thing that would make him very strong in a primary, but could hurt him in a general when he's running against somebody who's going to have all the money he possibly needs, and you don't get any better name recognition than winning the last 2 elections.
Yeah, I was looking at the Federal Election Commission right now, and Congressman Poliquin has got a war chest of about $1.16 million. That's he's sitting on right now. That's not counting anything he's currently raising. That's what's in the bank, so to speak. And so these other guys, they're zeroed out because they haven't reported anything yet. They haven't come to the deadline yet. But I think it's going to be hard, even with some of these guys who announced relatively early. There's one of the candidates who first in was Jonathan Fulford. He ran for the state Senate a couple times up in Waldo County against Mike Thibodeau, the current Senate president. He was in early. They're going to have a hard time matching that money. I mean, even guys like Golden are going to have a hard time, Probably Sinclair is the only one who's going to be able to build the funds that to match that.
Right. And as we've seen, when the races get close, there's tons of outside money that just flies in.
Yeah, but I just would caution everybody to remember that, Governor Paul LePage was outspent.
Yeah.
Both times, yeah. And that wasn't, money wasn't always the answer.
I think that's true of President Trump too.
That's right.
Yeah. Speaking of Paul LePage and President Trump, you had another story today where they may or may not have met.
I will say,
making a face. I thought that they did meet, but
I will say it is a short story because I'm not. It was on the president's public calendar that he was meeting with the governors of. It was Maine, New Hampshire, Mississippi, and Kentucky. So
for 5 minutes, did I read?
No. Initially, it looked like it was going to be a relatively short meeting, but then later, the calendar, when we looked at the updated calendar, it looked like it may have been as long as 50 minutes. Of course, this was planned out before what happened in Las Vegas, right. So that took some of the president's time today. So we don't really know the details. We asked what the meeting was about. The governor's communications director said that when they were ready to tell the Press Herald what the meeting was about, we would get some kind of update. It is now 3:00 in the afternoon, 3:45 maybe.
Yeah,
and we haven't heard yet. The best clue we got actually was from a newspaper in New Hampshire. The Concord Monitor had a quote from their governor suggesting that the meeting was about infrastructure and some other strategies. It was Governor Sununu's answer was only truncated, and it wasn't fully clear what the meeting was fully about yet. Either.
Is there something else going on this week with the governors, or are these 4 just down there for this meeting?
That was also kind of unclear, but I would say my guess, I was just guessing. The president has pivoted to tax reform, and arguably, LePage could say he was a tax reformer in Maine, and maybe he has some ideas for the president. But they didn't share that with us, so we don't know exactly. I'm speculating fully.
and LePage became a very strong advocate for the health care plan. I mean, they may use him as a surrogate again.
Yeah, it was interesting though, because I think of the 4 that were there, LePage, the governors from Kentucky and Mississippi were supporters of Graham Cassidy, whereas Governor Sununu, I don't believe, was. There's also another it was kind of like trying to find what the common denominator was, and those 2 governors, along with Governor LePage, appeared to back him, the president, up on his position on Charlottesville. But then again, Sununu was one of the Republican governors who kind of rebuffed the president in some degree on Charlottesville. So it was an odd mixture of governors.
Uh-huh. It is interesting that the governor goes to meet with the president and doesn't tell anybody about it. It's
well, he doesn't. As you reported today, they don't release his schedule at all. Is that correct?
No, they don't. There's one time since I've been covering LePage, which is about the last 6 years, that we got kind of a TikTok of his day in Washington, and that was after the inaugural, and he was going down there to meet with a few cabinet members, and the president would appear to end, short meetings with different members of the Trump cabinet.
What's the rationale for not releasing a governor's daily schedule? Have they ever articulated that?
Well, there's been times where they've suggested that there's some security concerns, but there's also just been kind of a long-standing, I don't know what, hostility towards certain news publications, largely those of us that work in print journalism. So,
where people pay them to lie to them. Isn't that what he says?
Yeah, the governor's not a big fan of newspapers. I'm sure everybody knows that by now. So
yeah.
Well, it's a public record, though, isn't it? I would think. Or maybe not. Maybe they can claim
I believe
security concerns.
Forward them in the past and to get these, but most governors usually are interested in telling you what they're
want you to know.
More than you want to know.
On. Right. So we don't know. I don't try to read too much into it most times. Mm-hmm. We just do the best we can and keep chipping away at the old rock pile.
Well, you've been doing a great job, and it's all really interesting stuff, and really appreciate you coming in.
Well, hey, thanks.
Thanks, Scott.
Appreciate being here.
So, Bill, I think this Democratic primary in the 2nd District is interesting. I mean, the fact that there's so many people running shows that people think they got a chance, right? I mean, an incumbent, but vulnerable.
Incumbent. I think they think that Poliquin is vulnerable, and that's because he because he's maintained such a low profile and been so kind of the artful dodger when it comes to staking out positions on really critical issues since he went down there. But that can work to his advantage as well. I think what's going to be really interesting in this Democratic primary is if you look at the span of candidates is how the ranked choice voting, assuming we have ranked choice
exactly
voting, will come into play there, because now you have some people who are relatively unknown. Mm-hmm. You have one guy who's really well known. And I think it's the dynamics of that whole ranked choice calculus, where the second choice becomes so important, is going to be really murky in this race, because you don't have these like a Michaud or somebody who's been around for a long time, and I think voters are going to. If I'm a 2nd District voter voting in the Democratic primary, I'm going to struggle with that unless I just kind of close my eyes and and rank them. But there's not a lot of time for these. What are these 7 candidates now?
Right,
to become that known to the voters that they can distinguish that way.
And it's going to be really interesting, because unless something has really changed in the era of Trump and people are so woke that they're going to start voting in primaries, you're talking about very few voters in specific pockets and divided a lot of different ways. And in a ranked choice system, which is the law of the land. It is
for now. Yeah, that could change between now and June, but we don't know.
We don't know.
I mean, going into this electoral year, 2018, with this question still hanging over pretty much every election, it's kind of mind-boggling, because you can take each election, each primary, governor, Congress, legislature, and you can run it out in 2 or 3 different scenarios, and you really don't know at this point which one of them is going to be the narrative. And the final the calamity could become a year from this November if the legislature doesn't do anything, and we have a general election in which ranked choice is used, and that election, if it's those iterated by the court, governor and state races, goes right to court. So the whole thing is undermined. It's like this train wreck that we can see coming, and nobody has really figured out what to do about it.
Or you have 7 candidates in the second district. I think, what is it, 9 in running for governor, in both parties, and nobody knows how the votes are going to be counted.
That's right. I think that there's a pretty. Well, I shouldn't even say this, but I think there's certainly a higher likelihood that the primaries will be ranked choice and will be decided by ranked choice than there is that the generals will be. Only because the constitutional flaw that was identified by the Supreme Judicial Court applies to the general. It does not apply to primary races. So those should be able to go ahead under a ranked choice formula pretty much unencumbered. But you're right, when it comes to strategizing and to, how do you get your message out, who do you target, all those kinds of things, I'd be tearing my hair out right now if I were a political strategist for one of these candidates.
Do I attack everybody?
Yeah, right.
Or do I be
or do
nice?
I hug everybody?
Yeah. Right. Come here, get away. Yeah. I mean, I think whatever they do, and the legislature, we should say, is coming back this month. And there's a possibility that they're going to have more than one bill to consider involving ranked choice voting. They could pass something like you said, where it stays in place for the primaries and the federal races, and send it to basically a compromise and send it to the governor, who I can't believe wouldn't veto it. And then can you get 2/3 in both houses to keep this system that was never anybody's intent. Nobody ever said, "Boy, we need more, different ways to vote." Like it's so boring the way every election is decided the same way. Let's have 3 decided this way and 2 decided this way.
But there is some irony here, because the whole citizen initiative phenomenon of recent years is, in many people's view, a direct result of the dysfunction of our government.
Right.
People say you can't get the job done, so we, the people, are going to take matters into our own hands and pass these laws. So we did that. And then we did it with the surcharge, the tax surcharge. We did it with marijuana. We did it with ranked choice voting. And then last session, there were all these moves afoot to undermine, if not throw those things out completely, at which point the people, the Citizens Initiative people, were up in arms screaming, "You're ignoring the will of the people." Well, here's the irony. They can't ignore the will of the people because they don't have their act together enough to do it. Right. So ultimately, these statutes that were passed at the ballot box will prevail, and could very well prevail in their original form. For example, with the marijuana legislation, if they don't get the
well, explain that again. How does that?
Well, they've got this whole package signed, sealed, and delivered, and everybody seemed to be in agreement on, and we could probably spend the next 2 weeks talking about all the minutia in that thing. I mean, a lot of work went into it, and now it's really in question as to whether it's going to get past the governor without a veto, if he vetoes it. What are the House Republicans going to do? So, and if all that happens, and if the whole thing grounds to a halt, well, then we revert back to the original statute.
The 2-page law that.
So the people win like they intended.
Right. Because the government is dysfunctional.
Exactly. Exactly. It kind of comes full circle. We're going to change this because you people didn't know what you were doing when you voted. Yeah. Oh, wait, no, we're not going to change this because we're so dysfunctional that we can't get a 2/3 majority on anything up here. So it's going to be a fun year.
I think they're going to do something on ranked choice voting, and because the people who like ranked choice voting like it because it's bad for parties. And that's most people in Maine are not members of parties, Democrat or Republican, except for the people in Augusta are every single one of them, with a couple of exceptions, are party members, one side or the other, and they hate ranked choice voting, and they all got elected by the system that the people are telling them is no good. They're like, it looks pretty good to me.
Yeah, it worked for me.
Yeah. I I don't know. I think it's a pretty good system. Yeah. So I think I have trouble seeing this kind of hybrid system where some races are decided one way and some are decided another, really making sense to enough people to overcome a veto. I could see getting all you would need is a bare majority to go with the governor's position, which is the whole thing should be repealed and started over. And that seems a much more likely outcome to me.
From a pragmatic standpoint, that would probably be the way to go, is just to toss the whole thing. But you do run a risk in doing that of major blowback, especially on something so fundamental as voting. I mean, you could make a pretty good argument that let's go back and do this again. And I know there were reasons for this, back when it passed, but this time build the constitutional amendment into it so that, in passing this, and we have to go back over the process there because it's not that simple. You have some legislative involvement there too. But, just do it right a second time around. My guess is it would probably pass.
Or you could do a primary, a runoff system that wouldn't run into any problems with the Constitution.
Right.
You could
more elections.
You could just have another election that narrows the field and it has the same result. It's as they say, the Rankchoice voting people say it's more expensive, but it's certainly more transparent.
You get your plurality. No, what do you get?
Well, you end up with two candidates.
Right.
So by definition, one of them's going to have.
There will be a majority,
votes.
Which is what the Constitution requires.
Yeah.
So it's just going to be a fascinating year, and this is, as I said earlier, this is the result of years of people feeling like they're not getting what they want out of Augusta.
Right.
And I think we're headed for multiple messes on multiple fronts next year as these things finally catch up to us, and they have to decide, what are we going to do with these goose eggs that the voters laid at our feet? We don't know what to do with them. It's going to be fun to watch. But as for the primaries, I think that's a big question, especially for the Democrats. Is under what circumstances are we going to choose a candidate next June? It's going to be very difficult. But right now, if I had to guess, I think it really comes down to between Golden and St. Clair.
Yeah.
And it's fascinating because they're two very different candidates, coming from two entirely different places. And we had Ben Grant in here last week, and he was talking about how Jared Golden is from Lewiston. That's huge if you're trying to win the 2nd District. If you have a candidate out of Lewiston, I think he made a very good point there. How much St. Clair is able to establish himself in the minds of voters as a legitimate, member of the 2nd District community is going to be interesting. On the one hand, he has the place in Portland, but heck, on the other hand, he spent more time up there than anyone.
Right.
So, it's not like he's a stranger to the 2nd District.
And he's a very well-spoken guy, charismatic. He doesn't come across as like, Richie Rich.
No, very low-key.
Yeah.
Humble. I was really impressed with his testimony down in Capitol Hill. When was it, last spring, I believe, when they had that hearing with the Interior Committee. I thought he availed himself really well. And if that's a sign of how St. Clair performs under pressure,
right,
then he's going to do really well.
I just remember after the last election, people talking about the kind of Democratic candidates that Democrats needed to recruit. They didn't look or sound like Lucas Sinclair. They sounded much more like Jared Golden. And not that people are always right in the aftermath, or that it's really ultimately up to the Democrats in the district to decide who they want to run in November. But it's an interesting development.
Yeah, and the other big divider though is money.
Yeah,
who has the bucks?
How do you break through a
guy like Golden might be the kind of candidate everybody wants, but if you match up dollar for dollar what he has going into this versus what St. Clair has, there's no comparison. So, it's kind of the conundrum around all politics these days is if you're independently wealthy, then you obviously start up with a major leg up, and then it's a matter of packaging yourself to the voters in such a way that the emphasis is not on your money, but ultimately that's the grease that's going to get you into a general election.
Right. That's when you pull out that log cabin that you grew up in.
That's right. Yeah. That's right.
All right. Well, we'll keep an eye on that. And this was an interesting day.
Yeah, sure is.
All right, thanks.
Thanks for listening to the Portland Press Herald podcast. Make sure you never miss a podcast episode by subscribing on iTunes or your favorite podcast aggregator. For more of our podcasts, visit pressherald.com/podcasts. Follow the link there to this episode to leave a comment. You can also leave a comment on our Facebook page. I'm Chad Gilley. Once again, thank you for listening to the Portland Press Herald podcast.